Wow. Well, welcome. My name is Tony. I'm the lead pastor here at Gateway. We're going to continue in this series that we're in, Unexpected. You know, overcoming the challenges that no one expects, but everyone experiences. So I'm going to throw out the topic right away to this week, irrelevance. At some point in your life, you're going to wake up and realize, who moved my cheese, right? Something has changed in the world, and you no longer are relevant to the younger generation. How many of you have experienced this where you heard somebody younger than you using slang that you're like, what? Yeah. How many of you younger people, your parents have used slang and you're like, what? Yeah. See, there is a breakdown in communication, right? Well, here's the thing. Change for us older folk is hard. It's hard. Change is difficult. Recently, I sat down with the staff and we got into something called the working genius. And the working genius comes from, you're nowhere close to where, they're all wondering what I'm talking about. They're nowhere close. There you go. All right. Thank you. They're wondering, we got into this working genius, and basically what it says is there are 6 geniuses that you work within. Everyone has a genius. The genius is, I can do this all day long, every day, every week, every year of my life, and I'll never burn out. I just love doing this stuff. You have your competencies, 2 of them. 2 geniuses, 2 competencies. This one you're good at, you can learn to do, and you can do it for a while, but if you have to do it over and over and over for a long, long time, you get burned out. Then we all have our frustrations. There's 2 geniuses in that. The frustration part is, if you ask me to do this ever, I'm going to be angry, frustrated, difficult to work with because I just don't do it. So there's 6 geniuses. I found out something about myself. I am what they call a DI. I'm a discerning inventor. That's my genius. And it made sense to me. Discerning means I'm able to look at a situation or look at a problem and I just get this gut feeling. As a matter of fact, some people close to me say, you know, a lot of things we've done at Gateway and how Gateway's grown has been on my gut. People ask me, how does God talk to you? God speaks to me in my gut. I just get this gut feeling that something's right or wrong, and probably 99%, my wife would disagree, 99% of the time, I'm right.
Didn't hear very many amens on that.
I know. That's why I paused there. I wanted to hear that. But I'm also an inventor, so I'm this discerning, gut-feeling inventor. When I see a situation, I like to come up with solutions, and I like to get out of the box and dream up new things. And some of you know that about me, right? You're like, oh, man, he's like, here he goes again, something new. That's my genius. And I learned that I don't mind change. As a matter of fact, I like to fix things that don't work. I like change. I like to look at a situation, I just get this gut that something's not working. Or maybe down the road, this isn't going to work. We need to make a change, and I love coming up with that stuff. But I've also learned this about myself. The older I get, I'm in my 50s now, the older I get, the harder it is to change. I got an amen there. Right? The older I get, and this poses another problem for us, because here's the real problem for us. Change gets harder, and yet everything around me is changing. And so you feel this tension in your life, even if you're a person who doesn't mind change. As you get older, there are certain things in life that it gets harder to change, and everything around you changing, and you feel this tension that you're becoming irrelevant. That you used to be on the cutting edge, you used to be at the top of your class, you used to be the number one person at work, and now younger people are coming in and they have new, fresh ideas. And so why is change hard? I thought about this. When I was younger, I found it easy to let go of irrelevant stuff because it wasn't valuable to me. When I was younger, I found it easy to let go of things because when I'm younger, I don't necessarily find a lot of value in that. And even when it becomes irrelevant, I'm okay to let go of it because it's not valuable to me. Perhaps you bought it because it was all you could afford, right? When you're just getting started, it's not what you really want, it's what you can afford. And so you go buy something that's older and irrelevant, and then the longer you have it, the more irrelevant it gets, outdated it gets, out of style it gets. It just becomes easier for you to get rid of it and go buy something that you really want as you get older. But as I get older, I tend to value my stuff more because I've had time to think and process what I want and how I want, and I'm able to go out and buy what I want. And so when something becomes outdated and irrelevant, I find useful, so I won't get rid of it. I don't want to change. I want to keep that. Even though it's irrelevant, it's valuable to me. Even though it's outdated and my kids laugh at me and roll their eyes and say, "Oh, Dad," I like it. I paid for it. It's what I wanted. The older I get, I tend to find it harder to let go of what I value, even if it's become irrelevant. Here's an example. Certain articles of clothing in your closet and drawers. Some of those articles of clothing just need to go away. Some of you, I'm talking to the older folk right now. So in my closet is hanging some suits that I never wear. But I paid for them, and I liked them 25 years ago. And I have some ties hanging there that at one time, man, they were in style. They were, I can't bring myself to get rid of them because I value them. Even though the times have changed, I keep telling, well, one day it'll be back in style, right? If you hold on to it for 30 years, eventually it'll come back. Let me tell you something. I have seen some clothes from when I was in the 70s. They never need to come back, right? Out of style, irrelevant. Or how about another one? A car that becomes so outdated but it works. It's useful. Young people don't value those things, so they're willing to change and to upgrade to the more modern thing. But us older folk, my wife and I used to shrug our shoulders, and I know my dad, my father-in-law is probably listening. Love you, Dad. But we used to laugh at you because you drove the oldest cars. Everywhere he'd go, he had this old car that was outdated, but it worked. It got him where he needed to go. And here's the funny thing. He could afford a better car, but he drove an old car. And we just kind of, as young people, rolled our eyes. Why don't you go get yourself a good car? It is a good car. It gets me where I need to go. How many of you remember that feeling you got when you were younger and you went to visit the home? Now, all of you older folk and grandparents, don't get offended by this, but this is how it goes. You went to visit the home of a grandparent or an older person and you felt like you stepped into a time machine. Some of the younger people are laughing. They get it, right? You walk in and it's just like, wow, call 1955 and tell them they need their stuff back. But here's the thing. You value that stuff. Even though it's irrelevant and outdated, the older you get, the harder it is to change. Young people look at that and they think, I had to buy that because that's all I could afford. I can't wait till the day that I can change it. Young people tend to go with the culture. They value being relevant. They dress to the current style. They buy the current cars. They decorate their homes with today's styles. And as we get older, we tend to value what we have more because we worked hard for that. It still works. It's still good. It's not important to us to be relevant anymore, but functional. Stuff is one thing. And we laugh about clothes and we laugh about cars and stuff in our homes and things like that. Stuff is one thing, but your life is another. It's one thing to be irrelevant with your clothes and your cars and your furniture. You might get that smile, that laugh, the rolling of the eyes from a kid or a grandkid. But listen, what happens when your life is deemed irrelevant? What happens when the younger generation stops looking to you for anything meaningful because they feel like you don't get it, you don't understand, you've become irrelevant to me? Your kids, your grandkids, they don't come to you. They don't care what you think about life's issues. They smile, they laugh, they roll their eyes, and they think, oh, Dad, or oh, Grandpa. The younger people at work, they leave you out of conversations. They don't want you on their teams. They don't feel you bring solutions to today's problems because you're irrelevant. Listen, becoming irrelevant will cost you more than you can imagine. Now, I'm not talking about being cool. I'm not talking about, if any of you men over 50 come with skinny jeans next week, I'm going to tell you to go home and change. I'm not talking about being cool and hip, and I'm not talking about being up with the styles. I'm talking about being relevant in the life of the next generation that's under you, that's behind you. And becoming irrelevant will cost us more than we can ever imagine. When irrelevance permeates what we do, how we communicate, listen, it messes with your influence over the next generation. You can rail against the culture all you want. You're just throwing away your influence in their lives. Listen, irrelevance is the erosion of influence. It erodes away till the next generation looks at you and thinks, you got nothing for me, which couldn't be further from the truth. When language and methods and styles no longer connect with the culture, we become irrelevant. It doesn't matter what you know. It doesn't matter your experience. It doesn't matter your education. It doesn't matter how many years you've done something. When you become irrelevant in someone's life, they no longer look to you for respect and help and anything. You're not speaking their language. Irrelevancy matters because we lose the ability to speak into the lives of the next generation. Our language, the younger people, we no longer understand and communicate. Like the people on the screen, the kids have their slang, and I'm not saying you need to go out and learn all their slang. That's not what I'm saying. It's an example of how communication breaks down between generations. And each generation puts a line in the sand and says, I'm not going to cross that. And that's okay. But I'm warning you, older folk, you'll become irrelevant if you don't engage in the next culture. Growing old, becoming irrelevant, it's not a new problem. As a matter of fact, there is a passage in the Psalms where the author of the psalm is an old man, and he is talking to God about being irrelevant. I'm going to start in verse 7. He says this, my life is an example to many. And isn't that what we want? Those of us 40, 50, 60, 70, we just want our lives to be an example for the next generation. He says, my life is an example to many because you have been my strength and my protection. You have a story to tell. You have a story in God to tell. You have a story that the next generation needs to hear and see and understand. And this psalmist is like this. He says, "Oh God, you have taught me from my earliest childhood." There's history here. "And I constantly tell others about the wonderful things that you do." Listen, young people need older people. Very old man over here. Young people need... Well, they didn't say it, no. Young people just have less experience. And now listen, young people, I don't want you to take this as a slam. I'm not. And if you're humble and honest about it, you're going to admit, yeah, I just don't have the years. I don't have the experience, right? You have fewer years to draw wisdom from. When you were young, when we were all young, we tend to see one side of thing because that's the only thing we see. That's all our experience is. We see one side of an issue or a problem, and we're passionate about our side, aren't we, when we're younger? When we were young, we tend to be opinionated because, frankly, we don't have any experience to have anything other than an opinion. And that's not a slam. It's just the truth. Culture tends to speak the loudest to our younger generation. Culture tends to have the greatest influence over our next generation. Every generation in our culture needs the previous generation to help them navigate life. Listen, they don't need from us our way of doing things. They don't need our methods. They don't need our music. They don't need our style. They don't need any of that. But what they do need is to see God and His story in your life. They need us to tell them of the goodness of God through the years, the faithfulness of God through the years, the love of God through the years. They need to see in us the years of life that we have lived. They need to see that. They need to see in us and around us our faith being worked out in fear and trembling, but in faith all the same. If we don't inspire the next generation, who will? Who will? But in order to do that, we need to speak their language. Years ago, I read a book, and the gist of the book was basically this. It was in the 90s, and he was speaking to the Christian subculture, which was just rampant in the 90s. And the author, it may have been Philip Yancey, I can't remember who it was, but he wrote this, and he basically asked this question. He said this, he said, Jesus is the answer. The problem is the church today has forgotten the question. What is he saying there? He's saying the church has the greatest news that the world needs to hear, and the next generation wants to hear it, but we're so caught up in our methods, in our culture, and keeping our culture and protecting our methods and the way we do things and what we like and what we don't like, that we become irrelevant. When we become irrelevant, we stop listening to the culture. We stop listening to the next generation. Older people, younger people need you. They need you. You have years, listen, of bad decisions and good ones. You have years. You have years of tries and fails. You have years of stories of God's goodness and grace and faithfulness. And the younger generation needs that. They don't need your culture that you had 30, 40, 50 years ago. We're never going back there. Culture changes, but what they really need is to hear the goodness and the miracles of God in your life. So the author goes on, and this is great. This is where he gets like really personal. Verse 9. And now, he says, in my old age, don't set me aside. I'm going to stop there for a second. For anyone that's 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, I'm going to stop there for a moment, and I'm going to say that again, and I want that to sink in. God, in my old age, don't set me aside. Do you hear the cry of this man's heart? Even when he's gray and old, he still wants to influence the next generation. He still wants to tell of the goodness of God. He still wants to have a relevant relationship with people who are younger than him. He says, don't abandon me when my strength is failing. And then skip to verse 18. And now that I am old and gray, do not abandon me. Oh God, let me proclaim your power to this new generation, your mighty miracles to all who come after me. Listen, young people need older people, but listen to this, old people, we need younger people too.
Amen.
We need younger people. We need them. Why do we need younger people? Because they give us purpose and meaning. Your purpose and your meaning in life ought to be to pass on the faithfulness of God to the next generation. As we get older, our mission should not be to cling to the culture that we value in the past. Our mission should be to embrace the next generation so that we might pass on to them the faith that we have had in God for so long. To hold tight to what we like is wrong. To hold tight to what matters to us is wrong. It's important that we pass this on. And as we get older, our mission is to value the next generation so much that we learn to tell them about God in a way they don't understand, in a way that they understand. We need the younger generation so we can pull them in and say, listen, I know we're different. And I know this culture's different. I don't get you. And sometimes you're like an alien from outer space to me. But listen, let me tell you about how I was once lost. And Jesus changed my life. Tell the story about how your life was adrift and the bad decisions that you made. Be honest with them. I was lost. I had no hope and I had no future. And I was going a direction that I just didn't know what was going to happen. And then I met Jesus. And He changed me. He changed my direction. He changed my life. Listen to me, older folk. Tell them about the mess that you made of your life, your finances, your marriage, your relationships. Don't pretend like you got it all together. But then tell them how Jesus changed all that, how He took the broken pieces of your bad decisions and He began to put together a life that had meaning and purpose. Tell them the story of how the people of God came alongside you in your darkest moments and lifted you up. Do you see where we're going here? Older people, we need younger people because they give us purpose and meaning. So, the signs that you're becoming irrelevant. If you're in your 40s, maybe late 30s, 40s, and beyond, have you felt this tension? Have you felt that tension of when you see today's generation, the millennials, the Gen Zs, when you see them, have you felt that tension? At work, a young person comes out of college and they come in and man, they want to change everything that you've been doing for 20, 30 years. And then it becomes a power struggle, doesn't it? You just lost your influence. At home, The kids' music, technology, clothes, language, you don't get it. Young people, I'm just going to tell you because our parents thought the same thing about us. Sometimes you're just like aliens from another planet. We don't get you. We don't understand you. But we love you. And your adult children, I'm about ready to do this. You watch how your adult children parent their kids and you think, that's not how I'd do it. You watch the younger generation and how they spend their money and how they handle debt, their work ethic and all of that, and you just rail against the generation. The way I see it, we have two choices. I'm talking to the older folk now. Late 30s, 40 and up. I'm talking to you. We have two choices. Number one, you can stay irrelevant. You can choose this. You can just settle in, right? Dig in and fight for what you want. Rail against the next generation. Rail for what you like and what's wrong with society and what's wrong with the culture. Listen, there were things wrong with your culture too. We can work behind the scenes to take us back to a time where we just feel more comfortable. We work better in that culture. We work better in that. I wish things the good old days. We can long in our hearts for the good old days. Live your life as though the best days are in the past. And there's no hope for the future because have you seen today's generation, right? Demand that the next generation see the world the way you see it. Push the younger generation aside. And when they don't, let the culture shape them. Because you're not going to. They'll write you off as quaint, outdated, maybe even insignificant. And you'll dig in all the more. You can rail against their culture, but you will lose their respect. And more importantly, you'll lose their ears because they ain't going to listen to you. Or, number two, become relevant. How do you do that? Wear skinny jeans. No, I'm kidding. Do not do that. Yes, if I see that from you back there, no. Here's how you become relevant. 3 ways that you can become relevant. And these are important. Now, if you want to write these down, feel free to. Because this is a process. You're not going to wake up tomorrow and say, I'm going to be relevant. This is going to be a process. But here's where you start. The first one is this. You need to love the mission more than the methods. And this is especially true in the church. Sunday school is a method. Music is a method. The number of services that we have a week is a method. Camp meetings, revivals, all methods. These are, listen, I know you grew up with that, but you do know that generations before you didn't have that. Over 2,000 years, the church has constantly changed its methods. But the mission never changes. The mission never changes. The American landscape, listen, is littered, literally littered with dying churches. And why? Because they're bad people? No, they're good people. They're great people. They're godly people. They love Jesus and they want to reach their... The problem is they've turned their back on the culture. A once vibrant and alive, making an impact in their community, but the culture around them changed and they didn't. Their methods became more important than their mission. And that's why they're dying. Today, we can keeping and protecting the way of doing church. And that might trump the needs of the next generation, but we're losing them. Today, there are thousands of churches right now as I speak that have a few gray hairs sitting in large auditoriums. They did their Sunday school, they sing their hymns, they meet on Wednesday night, Sunday night, every night at the door, they have their methods. They put their suits and ties on and they have their choir, and they do all of this stuff. And I'm not saying any of that's bad, it's not. It's just when the culture changes and the methods need to change and we don't. That's why we have a landscape of thousands of little churches that are dying, and the only people left in those churches are gray hairs. I don't want to be one of those churches. And neither do you. You want to influence the next generation. You see all these young people in our church. Did you know last week we had almost 30 children in our children's department? Did you know that? How many young families we have? Do you want to hold on to some things that the ways you used to do and certain things that you like and don't like? I'm sure somewhere in the Bible it says thou shalt have Sunday school or sing hymns or wear suits and ties or meet 4 times a week. I'm sure it's there, or God will smite thee. It's not there. Why? Because they're methods. They're simply methods to accomplish the mission. And when the methods need to change with the culture, we need to change with it. But we don't change our message and our mission. And I'm not trying to be cruel. And I know some of us, we love those old methods and we feel comfortable in those old methods and we feel like God speaks to us the greatest in those old methods. But listen, God could speak to you through a donkey if he wanted to. Those of you that know the biblical reference know exactly what I'm saying. And I'll use the King James Version. No, I won't. I'm not trying to be cruel. But what is more important? What is more important? Inspiring the next generation to follow Jesus? Finding new ways and methods to get our message out there? Or clinging to the way we always did things? When you put it that way, and this is serious stuff, I'm not jesting. We're losing the next generation, not because they don't want to know Jesus, but we've simply lost our influence over them. We cannot speak their language. We're not trying to understand them. So listen, the first thing you do to become relevant is love the mission, because the mission is always relevant. The good news that God loves you and Jesus died for you transcends eons and ages and millennia. That never changes. But the culture does. And how we get that message out needs to change. It needs to change. Love the mission more than the methods. The second one is this: become a student of current culture. And I just lost half of the gray hairs. Or the bald ones if you don't have hair. Yeah, I was thinking of someone there, but never mind. Become a student of current culture. Now listen, even if you prefer one over another, even if you don't like today's culture, you can still be a student of it. You can still learn about it. Each year that passes for me, it gets harder and harder to stay up to date with the culture. It just does. And those of you that are older than me, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I honestly have to say, I don't really like today's culture's music that well. I don't enjoy it, but I've learned this over the years of raising 3 daughters, and they're older now, out of their teens, is that a lot of the culture comes from their music. And here's the thing, why? Because someone once said that the philosophers of the day are the songwriters of the day. Music's important. Now, I'm not a big fan of it, but here, listen, most of the movies that are coming out and the shows, it's like, culturally, I'm like, wow, this is just way beyond. I just want to go and hide and stop listening to music and stop watching movies and I want to do all this, and I just want to settle in and watch Andy Griffith. I have found myself going to the Andy Griffith show more and more these days. Nothing wrong with Andy Griffith. But I do it because I feel more comfortable there, right? Some here. So here is the way to be a student of the culture. How about once a month? Oh, this is going to be hard for you. How about once a month you go out on the internet and listen to the top 40 music? Just listen to it. Listen to the words. Listen to what the messages are. Don't rail against it. You don't need to do that. But just go listen to the top 40. Or maybe go see a movie. Check out a movie that people are watching. Or maybe watch a show that someone keeps talking a lot about. And just involve yourself in the culture. Become a student of the culture. Why is it important to be a student of the culture? Because people who don't understand today's culture will never be able to speak into it. 3, surround yourself with younger people. Stop just hanging out with people your age. No matter how painful it is. No, I'm kidding. That's a joke. You know, one of the things that I've done intentionally here, when you look at my staff and the people that I've brought in, I have intentionally put younger people around me. Why? Because about 5 to 7 years ago, I started feeling this, I'm losing touch. I'm losing touch with the culture. I'm not getting it. I'm not understanding it. So Andy, how old are you? You're 40, but you just turned 40. How old were you when I brought you in? Yeah, it's time to retire you now. Beth, how old are you? 35. What's that? I know Beth, I can do that. She's okay with it. Yeah. Sorry, Nancy. You and I are the old ones in the group, aren't we? Yeah. Aaron, how old are you? 41. It's time to retire. But honestly, all of them are younger than me. And that's a reason why. I won't ask Jessica. She just turned 40, 2 weeks ago? A month ago. Oh. Happy birthday. But listen, surround yourself with younger people. If you want to stay relevant, you need to have younger people in your life. And here's the thing. Don't try to push them into what you like or dislike. Just listen. Listen to them. Hear what they have to say, whether you like it or not. Listen. They care more about your faith than they do your methods. They care more about your story in God than they do whether or not you wear the clothes they wear or listen to the music they listen to. You'll find this out when you hang out with younger people. You don't have to become them. They don't want you to become them. But they want to hear your stories. Did you know that Gen Z, as much as we rail against this generation, experts have come out and said that this generation could possibly be the next greatest generation. They have it in them. It's there. They have seen enough of our world and our governments and our mistakes, the war. They've seen enough that this generation can be the greatest generation. But they're lost. They need you to help them to see God in our world, in our lives. They need to hear your stories. Listen. So now I'm going to make a request of the younger generation. I'm going to talk to you. I'm talking to you specifically. Be patient with us. We love you. We just don't get you. We want to get you. We want to understand you, we can't help it sometimes because, like I said earlier, we think you're aliens from another world. But the truth is, our parents thought we were aliens from another world, and their parents thought their kids were aliens from another world. Know this. Listen to me. You are the best of us. And a truly unselfish person who doesn't demand their way would say this. You are the best of us. All of our hopes and our dreams and whatever it is we have visions of what the world might be someday is all wrapped up in you. So I truly believe that when the older generation strives to be relevant to the next generation, listen, the best is yet to come. I truly believe that. When we stop thinking that the best days are in the past, and we open our hearts to this next generation, the best is yet to come. When the older generation puts the mission before its methods, and we invite this next generation into our story with God, the best is yet to come. And when we intentionally, as a church, create space where the next generation can safely explore this incredible God that we know, without judgment, without condemnation, in the context of their culture, listen, the best is yet to come. I've always had a dream for this church that we would be, because I've seen so many churches where the older folk fail to pass the baton to the next generation. The next generation just leaves. They get tired of dealing with you. They get tired of fighting you. They get tired of you wanting them to be like you. And they just leave. I've seen so many churches fail to pass that baton. I've always had in my heart, and I've talked to some of you about it. I've shared this with my father. He's 70 years old. He gets it. We have to pass that baton well. And being relevant to the next generation matters. It matters because they are the best that's yet to come. They're the best of us, and we need to pass that baton well. Father, this morning, this message is personal, practical, and hard because we are creatures of comfort. May we look to others and what they need more than what I need. And this next generation needs us. And may the young people in our church, Lord, find adults, older people in our congregation who they can look up to, that they can see your hand moving and working in their life so that they might know that you are real. You are good. You are love. You are faithful. May the next generation see the mighty, mighty works of God in their generation and generations to come. And may we simply pass the baton well, because the best is yet to come, Jesus. Amen.